One of the things I like doing on this channel is passing out when, debunking myths, getting the real story out there of what happened with, various things like Star Trek and stuff. And to that, if one real useful resource is the website facttrek.com. That is their express mission, is getting the facts out. Not necessarily tearing things down, but saying what is the real story here. Like they get a real good thing about when Star Trek was given the Friday night at 10 thing, and it being considered a death slot. And it's like, not really. It's like, because if they had gotten the early Monday night slot that Gene wanted, they'd have been going up against the powerhouses like Gunsmoke. And I forget what was on ABC at the time. I'll probably put the graphic up. You can see for yourself. But it would have been a kamikaze slot. They wouldn't have made it past 13 weeks in that Thursdays if they'd gone Monday nights. Whereas Friday nights, even at the time, because in the Making of Star Trek, in the back chapter, we're talking about Wither Star Trek, they're playing about getting a Friday night at 10, death slot. Not necessarily, not even back then, but not now, because the X-Files did very good Friday nights at late. That's where he built its following. But also back at the time, but just before that, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. had that very same time slot, and it was struggling at the time. It had the same exact, the same exact demographic as Star Trek. The college, young adult, and they became a hit show in that slot. And so I don't think they were trying to kill the show. They were trying to give it a chance. Look, maybe the same thing will happen with Star Trek as it did with Man from U.N.C.L.E. It could find its audience there. Because they knew the audience is mostly kids. Friday night, it's not a school night. I'm still shocked I wasn't watching it at the time. I was 4. I could have been. But again, I think it may have just been just past general bedtime at that point. Not at the look. See, what was I watching in '69? The time, 68, 69. But that's not here though. What they've done lately, the latest thing is attacking the long-standing story that a second pilot, that was unheard of. It was unprecedented. No. It wasn't even unprecedented at the exact same time, or not even for Desilu. They were shooting a second pilot for another project they were working on. In fact, let's back up here and just, how unprecedented were multiple pilots for the same show? They weren't. And not even it was getting more and more unusual by the mid-'60s. Usually they got down to a point where it only took one pilot, but even then, it wasn't totally unusual. Because like I said, first starts, let's go back, the history of television. First, instantly out here, and they said this is not necessarily an exhaustive list. There's probably more examples out there that have just been lost to history, but the ones that come out, going back, Lum and Abner, it was a attempted to adapt a long-running radio show on CBS to television. They went through 4 pilots: 1948, 1949, 1951, 1956, and I think eventually they got a series going, but it didn't last long at all. I think they eventually spliced together 2 of them into a theatrical film, and it got really bad reviews. Fibber McGee and Molly. This is one of those no-brainer. Yeah, it was a hit show for decades on radio, for NBC radio. In fact, to the point, because there's an old record album that I got from my mother, actually, as part of when Reader's Digest was doing big record sets, and it was called When Radio Was King. One side is about all the news things that happened at the Hindenburg and Babe Ruth last week, but the other side is all the entertainment stuff. And it covers Fibber McGee and Molly. And again, the big gag on there was somebody I'll just get my clothes in the hall closet and open the closet and just hear the crashing thing. It's one of the things about radio. The theater of the mind thing, get the sound effects. Well, they tried to do a TV show, and it went through 2 pilots, 54 and 59. And that's one of those cases of it works better on radio. When that hall closet, you don't want to see the hall closet, you just want to hear it. And also the Great Gildersleeve, which was a spinoff of Fibber McGee and Molly, of one particular character. It also did, and they tried 2 pilots, 54 and 55, and it didn't really. It went for 1 season, 40 episodes. That's what they were doing back in the 50s. You know that 26 episodes a season was hot? Tried 40 in one season. That was a slog there. There was a couple attempts. Have camera will travel. This was a thing with Mike Connors back in the day. 55 and 56. It was about a photojournalist. And it really didn't go anywhere after that. A lot of these, they would eventually air on like these anthology shows, like Craft Suspense Theater was a popular dumping ground for failed pilots, just to get them out there and get something out of it. Hold on, I'm gonna edit this out later. Hello.
I am literally laying here with my eyeballs feeling like they're bleeding.
2 hours later.
Okay, where were we? Let's see, there we go. Yeah, they tried one on couple pilots on Double Indemnity. They don't know when the first pilot was exactly, but the second one was in '63. Basically, I think the old Fred McMurray. Well, actually, yeah. This one had Broderick Crawford and Jack Kelly, and original by Edward G. Robinson and Fred McMurray back in the '44 version. And there was a link on. I'll link the page itself on Fact Trek down there. There's links so you can actually watch these things. There's a couple of pilots for something called Tombstone Territory, both in '57. Ziv TV, and later these aired like on like Alcoa Theater, that sort of thing. It was a dumping ground for pilots. And there was one of them. This one, it sounds like kind of a no-brainer, especially at the time. In '57, they had two pilots for something called Collector's Item. Would have been a show, adventure comedy starring Vincent Price and Peter Lorre. Basically, Vincent Price would play the owner of a antique or art gallery type thing, and Peter Lorre was the sleazy guy who would bring in these fakes. So that sort of thing. And hijinks would ensue. They were both in '57. And then there's a couple of attempts at a Tarzan show, which is slightly ironic because the Ron Ely Tarzan show was Star Trek's lead-in for a while on NBC. This was in '57 and '58. They tried with Gordon Scott. He was the movie Tarzan at the time. They tried with the TV series a couple times. And moving on, we got '59 and '60. They had something I Remember Caviar, I think, and later retitled to All in the Family, oddly enough. Nothing to do with the later one, but and who the hell even knows if Norman Lear even heard of this one? But so this is both for NBC, and it still didn't get picked up. And then, of course, the more famous variety pulled up is what became the Dick Van Dyke Show. Originally, it was called Head of the Family. Carl Reiner was going to star in it, and it was the same general premise: a TV comedy writer and his bound, life at home, and then at the show. But they, first one in '58, they liked the idea, but not the executions. Okay, they reworked it, and especially when Dick Van Dyke was starting to come out, they would do it for him. So they reworked it into, the Dick Van Dyke Show, turned into a 3-camera comedy with, and Reiner would still have his hands in it as a producer, and also, as Alan Brady, as the maniacal thing, which a large part of that was based on his time on Sid Caesar's show of shows. I don't know if Sid Caesar was a crazy man like that. And then we come to 1964 and 65 for Star Trek. And as I said at the very beginning, not only was second pilots not unheard of, it was getting rarer and rarer, but it wasn't even unheard of at the time. Desilu themselves, at the same time they were getting ready to do a second Star Trek pilot, was also doing a second pilot. It was called The Good Old Days. It was basically about a caveman show type. Which, again, they tried twice, it didn't work. But it also because when they called back to Herb Soul and said, "I'm sorry, we kind of sandbagged you on that. We picked the hardest script we could. Let's see if you could pull it off." And for the large part, you did, but we didn't. We want you to try. We'd like to see something close to what you promised. And so when Herb suggested, "How about we just do a second pilot?" Nobody blinked an eye. Okay. It wasn't that unusual. It was unusual, but it wasn't uncommon. And even at the time, like I said, Desilu themselves were working on a second pilot for another show. In fact, was it also for NBC? Let me check the thing here. Because it got mentioned in the trades as well. Oh, they're redoing that one. No big deal. In fact, it wasn't even the lead of the article. The lead was about what would eventually become Green Acres. It was like third or fourth paragraph. Oh, and by the way, Desilu was reshooting a couple of pilots. Yeah. And this Good Old Days thing was also for NBC. So yes, at the same time, they're doing a second pilot for Star Trek. Desilu and NBC were doing a second pilot for The Good Old Days show. So no, it wasn't rare. It wasn't unheard of, but it was unusual. Put it that way. Normally, they figure if the first pilot doesn't work, we'll move on. We got too many to go through. But if they like it enough, yeah, they will. But they figure they're not quite there yet. They will. They would do a second pilot. And it's also wondering why I rail against going in air date order. Because air date order is totally arbitrary. It's a matter of what is available at the time we got to air something in this slot. It has nothing to do. And when certain things they start going, we got to start with the matchup. No, you don't. Okay. You're not under the same restrictions that NBC was at the time, where we need something. What's finished? Everything is finished. You could start with Turnabout Intruder first for all the difference that makes. But the best way to watch it, and the way it was going to be listed in the concordance when everything going, is production order. Start with, again, the pilots, of course, get those away, but also start with the Corbomite maneuver and move on. Muds, Women, and Enemy Within, whichever one. Charlie X was up in there. As I said, I often pointed out, the Man Trap was like the 5th one aired. And there's a few factors there. It's like it was one of the few they had finished. It was the only one that wasn't kind of out there as far as a typical sci-fi show. Because Charlie X was more of a coming of age thing. Muds Women was mail order bride story basically. Enemy Within was really kind of out there in psychological terror type thing. And Man Trap was one of the few where they actually died. It's the 60s, shoot. But had a proper science fiction monster running around on this ship and the planet, and it as far as what was available, it made more sense to run that one first than any other ones they had ready. And again, if you go back and get it in production order, the Corbomite maneuver really works as a third pilot because you're setting everything up there. All the relationships are set up, put up there. And I think it sets the best message of what the show's about. It doesn't end up with the Enterprise blowing away the Fesarius, and say, wait, we're the good guy. No. But yeah, definitely check out this. And other articles on this site too. But this is the latest one, and this one I think hits it right out of the park. They were going to... toot my own horn a bit here. They were going to run something on Martin Luther King, and I hyped in with this might be a myth you also want to bust up a bit. And it questioned me a little bit, but they haven't run the bit. It's basically the whole thing about Nichelle Nichols meeting Martin Luther King. That may not have actually happened. It's one of her best convention stories, but it didn't kind of crop up until real late in the game. And one guy on unfortunately, there's no video out there of it. But one guy on Trek BBS said he remembers seeing an interview with Nichelle back in like the late 70s, and it wasn't meeting Dr. King. It was kind of a hypothetical. As she's thinking about leaving the show, it's like, what would Dr. King say? And start building that scenario up into my, And whether or not there was an NAACP fundraiser at the time, I haven't been able to find anything. And usually they've got records. You look up NAACP LA fundraiser 67, and nothing shows up. And other ones do. So I don't know what's going on there. It may not have been in LA, but either way. because the thing is, you start putting in the show, because it keeps going right back to her story and the thing. But also, her Dr. King's kids have said, no, we didn't watch Star Trek at our house. We don't know what she's talking about. We were not a family of Trekkies. Her dad certainly didn't watch Star Trek. He was too busy doing things. So hopefully I've sent him out from the scent to track that down, because like that point I was like, yeah, Nichelle's gone, Dr. King obviously, but the kids are still very much around and very active. None of them are dropping off. They can certainly relate what their perspective was. It's like, oh, they didn't want to think on the show. No, we never watched that show. Sorry, nothing. No offense, but we didn't watch that show. No. So we'll see what happens on that. But yeah, this one, it's like, yeah, it's like I like this site. It's just great. Yeah. So with that, the channel is starting to grow some. How much of it is me getting back to this sort of thing, or how much of it is also due to my ongoing feud with Indy? I don't know. I'll take what I get. In the meantime, like, share, subscribe, and we will. Let's see, come over here. Oh, not that one. Try that one. We will talk at you later.